Okay, so thanks very much to everybody for coming to this webinar. So this is, I'm Alice Roberts, I'm from CPRE London. We're holding this webinar in conjunction with Michael Ball, who's from Just Space, and Quentin Given, Friends of the Earth. We have kind of got together with a view to trying to coordinate the environment sector's response to the plan, but also to the London Plan consultation, which is out at the moment. But we've also wanted to obviously help others to understand what it's all about and to give them our own thoughts on what's good, what's bad, and to make sure that you have as much information about it as you want. So so the aim of today's event is really to just give you a bit of an overview of everything in the plan, or in the consultation, I should say, and what it's all about, and to try to start to talk about the things that we do support, things that we don't support, things that you might want to respond to, and things that we feel that you really should respond to, you know, from an environmental perspective. The deadline, if anybody doesn't know, is the 22nd of June. My colleague John Sadler will be putting into the chat how you can respond. What will happen next is that we will try to put together some more stuff in writing in advance. So with about 10 days to go till the deadline, so to give everybody a good chance to use it or to read it. So by around the 12th of June, we'll circulate, certainly to anybody who's at this webinar on this list, and also to our own lists, if you like, our own contacts. If you aren't on any of our lists and you would like to be, please do just put your email address or name in the chat, and we can add you to our lists. So first of all, what's going to happen today is Michael's going to give us a quick overview of the kind of what's going on with the plan, and give us an overview of the plan, and then we're going to go through a number of the subjects that are dealt with in the plan separately. So I will cover some, Quentin will cover some, and then if you have questions, please do put them in the chat to start with, and then we're hoping we'll be able to have lots of time to discuss some things at the end. We're aiming to do an hour, but we'll go to 1:45 if needs be, and we really will try to end at 1:45. So without further ado, Michael, are you okay to put your slides? He's only got 4, I think, so don't worry, everybody. It's going to be quick. Michael, can't hear you.
Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Right, sorry. Right, I'm Michael Ball from Just Space, which is a network of grassroots organisations and campaigns engaging planning and development across London in all aspects of planning. So the London Plan, the mayor started on the last London Plan in 2016, and it was finally adopted in 2021. We've got the mayor is now saying we need to draft a wholly new plan, and he's starting that process now. He's asking questions and seeking evidence and making proposals. But we haven't got a draft plan that's going to come out next year. So what he's saying at the moment in this document, 80-page document, is that what is likely to come forward is going to be similar to the existing London Plan, but with some key issues that are going to be different. One is it's going to take into account the new government policies, the priorities and legislation about accelerating house building and reducing planning constraints like the Green Belt. We'll come back to some of those. And centralising decision making, which is part of the also part of the NPPF and the new planning bill, as well as socioeconomic changes that have happened over the last decade, and trends and technological updates. For example, data centres weren't a big issue 10 years ago. Now there's 8, I think, have been recently approved in Hillingdon, taking up large amounts of land. What the mayor is also saying is that he's given a clear statement in this document that he's going to stick to the principles of good growth. There are 6 principles that underpin the entire plan. It's a 400-page document, but the first 15 or 20 pages are about good growth. They're about sustainability, inclusivity, brownfield first, healthy city, low carbon, circular economy. A number of these, 6 of them, and they underpin all of what then follows in the plan. And he's saying that we're going to retain these. And the first question is, aren't these government blockers? These are all things that are requirements that developers are required to meet, and need to provide evidence that they are meeting them. And the danger is that they will be tossed aside in this rush to develop and build and build and build. So there is some way in which the governments could define these as blockers. It's really important, I think, that we use all our knowledge and evidence and experience to explain why these are really important, why they're necessary, why they're working, why they could be improved, how they could be improved, giving evidence, giving proposals. He's also going to produce a scoping report for an integrated impact assessment, but that'll come later. But what has really overtaken everybody has been this housing affordability crisis. And it is, sorry, I'm just trying to work out how to move the slide on. It is a housing affordability crisis. Housing is too much to buy and too much to rent. The income, the amount that's taken from people's income is huge as a percentage. And that has got slowly worse and worse and worse, which would imply that actually maybe the mayor's plan isn't so good. He's nevertheless saying he wants to fix the housing crisis and deliver sustainable economic growth. These are the two objectives he puts right at the beginning of this document, and that places a lot of work on planning, and frankly, probably too much work. For example, one of the elements to fixing the housing crisis should be rent regulation. Rents constantly rising are one of the things that increases the unaffordability and also increases potentially house prices. But that isn't a planning possibility. That's something beyond planning, and he was seeking government support for bringing in rent regulation. We need to bolster that. Now, the government says that the housing affordability crisis will be assuaged and there'll be economic benefits by building 1.5 million homes across the country, of which 88,000 is the target for London. We strongly challenge this as just base, and we don't need to go into all of that now. That's a long argument that lots of people will have beyond this space. But simply building more homes, we don't believe will improve affordability, which is the key issue, and also building affordable housing itself, i.e. council housing, social housing, is a big issue. Now, the mayor is willing to embrace the government's growth agenda, and bear in mind, he's produced this good growth strategy, and he has always stood on not building on the green belt. But he's saying, well, now he's willing to accept this, but only on condition that the government funds major transport infrastructure and social housing, which is essential to deliver that high density development. So he's saying, if we want to build high density development on the greenbelt or elsewhere, we need to have proper transport infrastructure, and we need to be able to fund the social housing that needs to be part of that. He is suggesting that the targets are unachievable, and he wholly puts this on the government. We've been told by this, as a quote, we've been told by the government that housing needs in London is 87,000 a year. So this isn't based on the traditional strategic housing assessment. It's based on a very different new thing that the government's brought in. And to give you an example, it's very stark. This is a graph in the document that he's produced that shows from 1871 to today, 2021, no one has ever built in London 88,000 homes. The nearest we've got in 1931, we got just over 80,000 homes. Actually, since the war, it's been just touching 40,000 at best, and a lot of that was council development, which obviously isn't happening. Council homes aren't being built. So that in itself says this target is really unachievable. But nevertheless, trying to get more housing is the strategy. So how and where would growth be delivered? He says, I want to see local planning become more flexible and focused on securing permissions for housing development. Now, that's a worry, because that means flexibility means, well, maybe you can get rid of these standards about low carbon, or when you're making a decision, you can put aside the issues of biodiversity, net gain, etc. That flexibility the government is also seeking, and but it's worrying that he's saying he wants to go along with that. he also says, my preference will always be for us to secure as many homes as we can on brownfield sites, but this alone will not be enough. I want to ensure the release of the Greenbelt to help address the housing crisis makes the best use of land and meets strict requirements. That, I think, is really important, that we need to ensure that if there is any release of the green land, that it does meet these strict requirements. There is, on the other hand, there is a point in this plan where it says maybe we could put the industrial land on, swap it and move it out of parts of inner London and push it out onto the green belt, which doesn't meet these strict requirements. So it's not always a straightforward document. This. Where would that growth go? Well, there's already 47 opportunity areas, and there's a lot of tall buildings and all sorts of stuff going on in those. I'm sure you know of one or in one. The central activity zone, town centres, all of these have been identified in the current plan. He's reinvestigating industrial land. We've lost 25% of our industrial land over the last 25 years. He's stopped doing that over the last decade, but he's reopening the question there. Also wider suburban land, and this is to do with improving transport infrastructure, so metroisation, i.e. increasing the number of trains, rather like the overground circle service that's been so successful. He wants to do that in other parts of suburbia, and therefore can increase the densities in those areas. And backland small sites, which do provide a lot of the where housing is going. And then the Greenbelt and MOL, and that's very worrying. Because that is our strategic open space in London. Affordable housing is the big problem because it is all dependent on the money coming from the Chancellor. We're going to hear about that hopefully next week. So we might have a settlement, we might not have a settlement, and that will answer some of the questions that we're asking about this. But the key issue I think that we all need to ask is, how can we support and ensure that the good growth approach is retained and strengthened? Evidence of what works, what doesn't work, what could work better. All of these things, I know many of you have got great ideas, and it's about sharing those ideas and trying to maximize this at a stage where he hasn't got to conclusions. In a year's time, he'll have conclusions, and he'll then have his fists up and he'll be defending it, and we'll go to an inquiry, a public inquiry. But at this stage, they're open-armed, saying, give us your evidence, give us your ideas. So good luck. Oh, by the way, we've got this conference on the Saturday the 14th, Just Base. Saturday the 14th, 10 a.m. I put the stuff in the chat, 3 hours. And we're looking at this whole issue we're giving ourselves a week to finalize our response. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Michael. And that was a whistle-stop kind of overview. And now what we want to do is to talk about some other bits in more detail. But before we do that, I think the key takeaways from me there are, well, number one, this is the early stage consultation, and this is the point at which we can still influence things. So it does become much harder the further along you get. So yeah, definitely take that on board. It's good. A lot of it is good news. I feel, that there is a lot in here which we hope that that will be retained within what was broadly a good London plan, and a lot that we can support. There are some things which we are really concerned about. And the other thing I think that I take away from that, Michael, is that it feels like it's Sadiq's plan, but that there's been potentially some pressure applied for some things in there. So this is about flexibility and sweeping aside planning and getting rid of the green belt, and these things have never been Sadiq or Jules Piper or anything really. They feel very number 10, and so I think as Londoners it's up to us to make sure that we present what's needed for London. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about Greenbelt and housing, and then MOL and green spaces, and then Quentin's going to talk about some other aspects of environmental issues within this plan, and then we're going to come back at the end to speak briefly about biodiversity and water. So Greenbelt. Number one, obviously, the very disappointing thing is that the commitment to not build on Greenbelt has been lost now. So we have to face that head on. One of the things that we want to say is to bring into play this point about the number of homes and why 88,000 is simply set up to fail. Now, for anybody who wants to make this case, CPRE did an amazing publication 10 years ago, 2015, when this targets business has been going on forever. And that was called Set Up to Fail. And it basically explains really clearly why, if you give huge targets, which can never be built, that just means that Greenbelt is released or countryside is released, urban sites lie idle, brownfield sites lie idle, and it's the worst of all worlds. You don't get any more homes, you don't get any more affordability, you just lose your countryside, and your brownfield sites lie idle. So we would definitely really hope that people can make that argument. So I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I'm trying to think if there are obviously other things to be said about Greenbelt and its importance for other things. So we'll come back to that in a minute, but it feels like there's a bit of a reluctance to specifically allocate areas or sites, so allocate specific sites for things like water management or for new biodiversity habitat. So I definitely feel like we can push for a stronger designation or safeguarding of sites for infrastructure needs, for example, for wetlands, to filter water runoff from roads, or to manage flood risk, and indeed for biodiversity habitat. So I definitely feel like we need to emphasise that aspect of the importance of Greenbelt land to our city. So moving on to metropolitan open land, and we've been led to understand that metropolitan open land wouldn't be part of the Greenbelt review, and I don't know if it will be. I don't think it is part of the Greenbelt review, although correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, if you know any better, but there is this really quite alarming and slightly random paragraph in the consultation which talks about golf courses and metropolitan open land, and how we have too many golf courses, and they leap to a very quick conclusion that could provide space for housing. And I think that's not only got no basis in reality. Sorry, I should have said that. So the argument for this is that they are publicly inaccessible and that they lack biodiversity. But I think I need to be really clear that publicly accessible in terms of sports is not the same thing. So most sports in London run on the basis that sports clubs run clubs. So they are sports clubs, they're run as charities or CICs. They're not professional sports clubs, they're not for profit, they're not paying sports people, and they don't have shareholders. They run clubs, which are community grassroots clubs. They either lease or own a site, and then they run their club on the basis of subscriptions or fees, and that's a very completely normal model to run sports in London and elsewhere. And indeed, a lot of metropolitan open land is run in that way. So somehow singling out golf as being publicly inaccessible is factually incorrect in a way, or it's misleading. So, and the other thing, of course, is that sports fields or pitches or courses, golf courses, are not there to provide biodiversity. Actually, I don't think there's evidence to underpin this idea that they have no biodiversity value at all anyway. But the point is that actually sports facilities are part of what we need in London, and that's acceptable. That's good. And so singling out golf feels absolutely like something which has been just thrown in there as a response to what is in effect a lobby by house builders, a kind of thinly veiled set of people who argue out there, who are arguing that the golf belt, as they call it, is, we've got too many golf courses in London, therefore we should we should get rid of them all and build houses. So I just feel like we need to push back really hard on that. And say, you know, if the mayor genuinely feels that there are too many golf courses and that land is needed for other things like other sports or for biodiversity habitat, then that is what we should be considering, and that should be discussed with those golf clubs and the other sports authorities in London. That we don't make that leap to, oh, well, therefore we should build all over it. And the key principle of metropolitan open land is that it should be retained as permanently open land. So that's a really, really important one for us, and quite worrying and disappointing, I suppose, because a lot of the London plan work is very, very well evidenced, and we just feel that that one is really a very kind of political trope. So moving on to green spaces and green and open spaces. So here there's a proposal to change the way that areas of deficiency are identified. So that means areas which are deficient in green space, so that people can access. And I feel like that's a really important proposed. It's not a proposed change, but they are asking for views on whether they should think about changing it from just looking at the distance that you are away from a park to the number of people who rely on that park and the size of that park. So that's something we've actually been campaigning for some time, that the idea of areas of deficiency is a really good one, but that we really do need to think about the way that it's calculated. And so we would definitely support that. And we will be putting in lots of evidence, both now and over the next 12 months to support that. So that's the kind of overview of those issues. And then Quentin's now going to talk a bit about buildings, energy efficiency, and then we'll come back to transport together. So buildings and energy efficiency, Quentin.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. So there's quite a lot about increasing density and design issues around that people may have views around. From a strictly environmental point of view, I think we'd want to say that one of the big issues that the document does acknowledge is embodied carbon, the amount of carbon that's released when you make steel, when you make concrete, and so on. So there's issues there about how buildings are built. There's issues about the preferential option of going for refurbishment and converting existing buildings. That uses a lot less carbon than building new buildings, demolishing and building new buildings. There's also an issue about very tall buildings having a disproportionate amount of embodied carbon. So the amount per dwelling goes up very considerably in very tall buildings. There's also, in terms of building standards, currently there's a policy requiring or desiring dual aspect housing developments. So this is to deal with, to mitigate overheating and the impacts that already has, but it's clearly going to have a lot more in the future as temperatures continue to rise. So currently, dual aspect means having windows or doors openable on more than one side of the building so that you can get a through draft. And this makes a really big difference to people without having to have air conditioning. And there's a suggestion that this policy could be weakened to allow more flats or more homes to be squeezed into any given space. On energy efficiency, the sort of other side of that question, the document asks if we should be maintaining higher standards in London than in the rest of the country, which we currently do. The existing London plan does have higher zero carbon standards. And I think our answer should be unequivocally, yes, we should be retaining high standards. They should be improved from the existing ones wherever that's technologically feasible. And they should be extended to all housing developments and commercial developments, not just those of 10 or more units, which is the current limit. And that they should also apply to conversions and refurbs, so that where someone's building an extension or doing work on property that requires planning permission, that they should be required to improve the energy efficiency of the building as a whole. Some boroughs do have that as a policy, but it's not consistent. There's also the question of the zero carbon levy where buildings, developments over 10 units don't meet the London Plan standards, then boroughs have the option of applying a levy to that development to say, well, if there's going to be a sort of excess of 90 tonnes of carbon a year over and above what would be expected if you met the standard, you have to pay a per tonne levy for a sort of 10-year period. Some boroughs do that, not all do, and it's inconsistent. And the document asks, you know, if there should be greater consistency. And I think we should support the idea that there should be greater consistency, and it needs to be set at a realistic price. What does it actually cost to reduce carbon emissions or to take back carbon emissions in different parts of London? Also, it's more expensive to do building works, to install solar panels or air source heat pumps, whatever, in central London than in outer London, just because of the issues around traffic and parking and things like that. Finally, on transport, obviously this is a London plan, it's a planning document, not a transport strategy. So there's a sort of limit, I guess, to the sort of detail that we would expect or want to put in there. But it does provide an overall context and vision for what London should be like. So the transport issues are not insignificant. We would support, I think the Mayor, as Alice said, around improving public transport, improving capacity and so on. Clearly we need to improve active travel and increase active travel. This goes back to the last mayor, or the sort of current mayor's transport strategy does have a commitment to reducing overall levels of traffic. And I think we need to push very hard to keep that part of the transport strategy, and for that target to be reflected also in the London plan. So parking standards are clearly vital in that, in developments, but also potentially, you know, the amount of parking, on-street parking, and that, because that is a land use issue. How much of our land, our public open space, is taken up with parked cars? So I think they're the key things I wanted to mention. Back to Alice.
Yeah, thanks. And just to add on the transport side of things, that the Mayor has mentioned various things that they would expect boroughs to do in relation to delivering the Mayor's transport strategy. And one of the things that is mentioned is curbside strategy. And it's really interesting because things have moved on a lot in the last 10 years since the last London plans were developed. And we have been lobbying quite hard to say there is a lot of what we call grey space in London. Now, in fact, grey space takes up something like 12% of all land in London, and that is roads and other grey car parking spaces, for instance. And while obviously we understand that there's going to need to be roads and obviously space for car parking, we do kind of talk about how incredibly important that space is going to be to the future, for the future, in terms of not just active travel infrastructure. So that would be things like, but active and sustainable travel infrastructure. So that would be things like bus lanes or cycle parking, but green infrastructure, which would be things like sustainable urban drainage on streets, or trees, or street trees. And indeed, we are going to need to take street space and make it into space which people can use for recreation as well. So there is a very good example in Camden, which is where Alfred Place was in fact turned into a park. The whole street has been turned into a park in an area where there was precious little space for people. In fact, it's an area where people work and where students are, so that they can go outside and hang out, because there was almost no space like that, which didn't have cars either moving or parked. So all that grey space, it seemed to us, for a spatial strategy, which is what the London plan is, a strategy which deals with how we use space, to completely ignore 12% of London seemed to us to be entirely wrong. So we very, very much support the idea that that the plan does have policies on this, and we really hope that actually that ultimately we'll say more about it. But we're really pleased to see that it is at least in there, just, you know, as an acknowledged statement that curbside is important, what they're calling curbside. Yeah. So, so we just need to finish talking about biodiversity and water. I just want to kind of talk about those together, and that's really about, because I think the two things kind of go together in terms of what I think we might propose. So at the moment, the consultation document says that the London plan will play a role in delivering the LNRS, which, for those who don't know, is the London Nature Recovery Strategy. And what we kind of really feel like is, well, it's not very specific in how it does that. And we've been looking at where around the country where there are clearer links between the local plan and the local nature recovery strategy, where they've actually managed to allocate sites and for nature recovery. And I think that's kind of where we need to be heading with that one. So that's allocating sites specifically or safeguarding them into the future. And we're kind of looking into that idea of safeguarding, which is commonly used for example, rail infrastructure. But actually, we're kind of wondering if that would be something that you could use for example, well, you could use it for water infrastructure. But in the modern age, actually, what we need to manage water is wetland suds. So, like I said, for road runoff, so to manage and filter pollution from road runoff, for example, for big roads, then that road drain already it only goes to one place. And so it's not like you could put that anywhere in London. It goes in quite a specific place. So, I feel that we need to kind of talk about identifying the sites and actually allocating, either specifically allocating them or at a minimum safeguarding them. So that's the overview. I mean, I'm sure there may be others here who have more, expertise on those subjects in particular. So what we'll probably do now is open up for chat. I just wanted to take one question first, which, and then maybe John, if there are any questions in the chat, and then we'll start to take hands up. So there's been a bit of a discussion about why exactly building homes won't bring house prices down and won't solve the housing crisis. And I think we don't want to deal with that in a great deal of detail today, because we've had a number of webinars and there is quite a lot of stuff on our website already about that. But essentially, what we're saying is that all the evidence points to the fact that even though London's population has increased, the number of homes in London has increased more, but prices have gone up by, so something like population increased in the period 2013 to 2023, population increased roughly, sorry, I might have the figures wrong, 6% or 9%, but households increased by around 11 or 12%, I think, and prices increased by something like 65%. And it's really to emphasize that housing markets don't work on that kind of, pure theoretical supply and demand model. And in fact, unregulated housing markets end up with where we are now. So I noticed one terraced house in the street that I live in appeared with 7 doorbells just recently. We know that that's going to be converted or has been converted to bedsits, and almost certainly will probably be rented to the council for temporary accommodation. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about, that just building houses doesn't solve any of those problems. But I don't really want to dwell on that too much today, because we have dealt with that in others, and we want to focus on the environment aspects today. So if we could I'll bring you in, Richard, briefly. Hopefully you've got something to say about our greenbelt. Richard Knox-Johnston from the London Greenbelt Council, and then John, if you could see if there's something in the chat that you could say. Richard.
Yes, hello Alice, and thanks for organising today. I'm chair of the London Greenbelt Council, and looking at this report and having read it through, we need to bear in mind that the Treasury runs government, and everything has an economic value as far as the Treasury is concerned. And therefore, it might be worth hitting at the Treasury aspects or the economic aspects of losing Greenbelt. First of all, as the health and welfare. Now, we had a talk from a professor at Essex University, says that people having access to the Greenbelt from central London might save in future the health service £20 billion a year. So that's a considerable figure to help with stress and mental illness in particular. Second point is they talk about flooding. And of course, the Greenbelt plays a considerable role in flood prevention of London. Now, here again, they're talking about building flood defences. Now, flood defences in London are not going to be inexpensive. They're going to be very costly indeed. And is there any guarantee that having built the flood defences, they're necessarily going to last more than a few years? The Thames Gateway is an example of something which didn't last as long as people thought it would do. The third thing which they keep mentioning in this report, which is very interesting, is overheating and the fact of it has on buildings in particular and how that works. But they are very concerned about overheating. And when they talk about families and homes for families, again, they're looking at the problems of overheating. What they do admit in that particular aspect is that getting access to the Greenbelt is an opportunity to get away from the heat and to feel better with it. And it obviously acts as a funnel for heat to get out of London. So again, that's an economic value which we could look at. The one thing which isn't in this report, which I was rather surprised about, is community housing projects and how these can provide affordable housing. They are obviously an excellent idea, which I cannot understand why both the government and the London plan doesn't take into account. Thank you very much indeed, Alice.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. I think there are bits of Greenbelt like Hatton Fields near Heathrow, and of course Heathrow is a massive heat island and causes heat problems. So that piece of land next to Heathrow becomes extremely important from that point of view, and yet it is threatened with development even now, without the Greenbelt review. On community housing projects, that's a really good point, I think. In fact, we're hearing that sometimes within London, the only projects which are now viable for housing are mutuals. And of course, there's also the community land trust model. So maybe we could talk about, Quentin, Michael, at some point we could talk about whether that might be something that would be appropriate to talk about in the response. John, did you have, my colleague John, is hopefully maybe picked up something else from the chat?
Yes, we have one or two questions. Rakesh asks, is there any plan to encourage people to convert front gardens into rain gardens, storm drain management, refilling aquifers, biodiversity, etc.? So a question about rain gardens. So,
sorry, John, you were quite quiet there, so I'm just going to repeat that. So it's a question about front gardens and just front gardens?
Converting into rain gardens.
Okay, so we have, it does mention front gardens, I think. Has somebody got the paragraphs? But we certainly are going to propose, I didn't put this on the list of things to talk about, but we do run the front gardens network, and we certainly are going to propose some things around front gardens. At the moment, what we're thinking is that, of course, at the moment they're subject to permitted development rights. You can create a front garden parking space without having to get planning permission. So we feel that that permitted development right should be removed for the whole of London, to avoid every single council having to do it on its own. It would be a lot more efficient. But we also think that there might be a way to say, right, if you're doing an extension in your property, or if you are, want to do anything to your property and are looking for planning permission, that will be conditional upon you removing paving, depaving and regreening aspeted garden. And of course that can apply to back gardens too. And a lot of parts of London, sheds have been allowed to take over the vast majority of all gardens. That varies a lot across London. So I definitely think that it's worth talking about gardens and their incredibly important contribution to water management and indeed biodiversity habitat. They do talk about green corridors, so that's it's worth saying something about that in there in your response, definitely, I would say. And yes, I think we are also going to mention rain gardens in gardens and rain planters, so capturing and attenuating rainwater from going down, to stop it going down into the sewers, which of course in inner London, for those who know, where the sewers are combined, rainwater goes into the same sewers as your sewage, which obviously frequently ends up in it all being dumped into our rivers. So yeah, that's a good one to bring up, and definitely something I think we would hope that a lot of people would put in their response. So that would be great. John, any other ones here?
Yes, Tim says transport constitutes 30.5% of London's carbon emissions. Hence, petrol, diesel mileage reduction must be a key part of the plan. That's more a comment rather than the question, but
yeah,
it might be not sure of how much there is of that in the new plan.
Okay, we'll go to Tim. If John, you could keep an eye on that chat there. Tim Root.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important to emphasise, particularly in view of the Mayor's rather grandiose statements on the topic, that carbon reduction is the most serious challenge we face, and the plan should reflect that in various ways. That includes both transport, and it includes utilising empty buildings as much as possible, because that will be much preferable to far, far more emissions from building additional buildings.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Carol. Carol, are you there?
Yeah, here I am. Yeah, I'm going to talk sort of Enfield specific. I have put a question on the chat because this has come up for Enfield in terms of the large swathe of greenbelt that not that the council and the local developers want to build on, but that TfL has proposed for development for 12,000 homes, completely sort of changing suburban Enfield into an urban area. And they keep coming up with the best use of land. And does that just mean high density? That's one question. And the other question is the reason that they are picking this area, which includes a country park, which is rare habitat conservation area, and various other local considerations, is simply because it's near a tube station. So we're just very concerned, even though I did ask Jules Pipe at the London Forum, I asked him this question, you know, just because something's near a tube station, does that mean it's going to get built on? He said, oh, no. But Lisa Fairmaner, who was actually writing the London plan, she sort of jumped in and said, waffled away that it's all a matter of balance. So I am very concerned about that. And I think we need to push back against that.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, because I completely agree. And thank you for asking the question to them, because I didn't manage to get a ticket to that event. But I think that what they've said about Greenbelt is, you know, we want to retain strong protection. If there is going to be Greenbelt building, then it needs to meet certain criteria. And I think we all need to be really clear that if you build next to a station, there is lots of evidence, and the RTPI, the Royal Town Planning Institute, a long time ago, did a big study on how if you build right next to a station does not, a train station which goes radially into a town or city doesn't mean that will cater for all aspects of travel. In fact, and perhaps surprisingly, it caters for something like 5%. So if you are assuming that all trips are going to be commuter trips, for example, into London, then fine. But actually, most trips are not. They are made either locally or often by car. So if you are not able to, if you don't have the infrastructure, you don't have the buses, for example, or the cycle track or whatever it is, and you don't have the local shops, you don't have the services, you don't have the schools, you don't have the supermarkets, the doctors, then all of those trips are going to be made by car, because the station that you're building the houses out doesn't necessarily go directly to that other space that you're trying to go to. So we do have a big problem with that argument that, yeah, there's a train station there, therefore it's all going to be fine. And we would certainly encourage people to raise that, and we certainly will be too. I've got Carol, I'm not sure if you're going to put your hand down. Okay.
No.
So we've got Matt, Barking and Dagenham, and then Anne Gray. Matt?
Yeah, thanks very much. Hopefully you can hear me. Sorry, my camera's not working. So we have the sort of Barking Riverside development, and we also have a civil partnership programme, another GLA thing, which is sort of Thames Road corridor. Huge amount of development going on. I mean, I think one of the concerns is building somewhere that does not have adequate social infrastructure. According to the Trust for London Poverty Profile, we had some of the highest rates of premature mortality anywhere of any London borough. 17, 18 years on, still no health centre. Beam Park down the road started, I don't know, 2015, they get health centre. And like very little by way of transparency in terms of open board meetings, understanding of the detail of finance and accountability. You know, the wrong site in the wrong place in terms of jobs and so on. I think what I wanted to, so any support and advice hugely appreciated and welcomed. We're a community development trust. We network with lots of people here, lots of support from Just Space and so on. But the thing that I wanted to ask specifically was around incinerators. Now we have 3 of those on our doorstep, and I don't locate that in a lot of the discussion and the London plan. Apologies, I joined late, but it seems absolutely gobsmacking. You know, when people have one of them in their backyard, let alone one of the largest development sites in Europe, that's a significant thing. And so a lot of these airborne particulates, depending on whether you look at the World Health Organization as opposed to other measurements, are of concern. So I guess one of my questions is, to what extent are incinerators factored into environmental impacts, health impacts? Surely not a good idea to started off with 10,000 units. It's now looking to be 20,000. You know, without the social infrastructure, but the health impact is a massive concern. So how do we think about holding that issue to account more fully? And I guess other aspects would be, as with a lot of London, but the East End of London did not do well in terms of landfills historically, and so it feels like building on areas. You know, Barking's got a history of asbestos, for example, and so on, that there needs to be greater tightening up and scrutiny of that. The final thing I'd say is we have a Ripple Nature Reserve, which again seems to have gone from 10.1 hectares to 7.7 hectares and has been closed since 2018. So, you know, nature reserves, fundamental access in terms of not just the environment, but general well-being as well, not really being factored into what is in effect a GLA town in the making, where we are. So yeah, I think my main thing is just to get a response around the incinerators and an effective way of kind of, yeah, factoring in what that means in terms of impact on people and environment.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I actually have written a whole load of stuff in way of response on the waste management side of things, because I used to work in waste management and I just have a kind of personal interest in it. And actually CPRE London, we do talk about it, largely because not many other people do anymore. So I would say, I don't know about how you go about tackling existing incinerators, but for my response, what I have said is that London has one of the worst recycling rates in the country. It's just shocking. It's embarrassing. Now, if we just improve that by 10%, that would reduce our need to have landfills or have incinerators. And in fact, we do still have active landfill down the Thames estuary. I mean, it's just shocking. So I just feel that, you know, there is this kind of lip service given to, yeah, we need to recycle and circular economy and all that. And yet, you know, our recycling rates have gone nowhere in 10 years, no improvement whatsoever. So there are two ways to improve recycling rates very quickly. And one is to communicate with householders and the other is to back it up with enforcement. And so that's where the investment's needed. And if you do that, then you very quickly see recycling rates improving. The other thing that you then need, of course, is what's called MRF capacity. Now, MRF is a shorthand for MRF, which is called a materials recycling facility, which is actually a sorting facility. So for me, the point is about where are we going to put those facilities, because we do need to increase our recycling. We also need to increase reuse, and there's huge opportunities to do that with, you know, there's everybody, or a lot of inner London is now having deliveries, and supermarket deliveries are really common now. So there really ought to be an easy way to send stuff back to. So it just seems like there's massive opportunity there, and that there should be some consideration of planning for that infrastructure into the future, or again, at a minimum, safeguarding it. So I hope that gives you some ideas. I feel like absolutely we should not be building any more incinerator capacity ever in London. You know, there's really no need for it. If you build an incinerator, you just have to create the stuff that goes into it. And that means you don't recycle it. So just by increasing our recycling rates from the shockingly low level to a reasonable, sensible level would pretty much crack that problem. Anne, sorry, you've been patient. Can't hear you. Sorry, you're on mute.
Okay. I'd just like to turn the conversation briefly to heating rather than cooling. London has a high proportion of flat dwellers. That proportion is increasing all the time. Where you have flats, each individual dwelling has a restricted amount of roof space available to it for solar panels, and a restricted amount of space available to it for under the ground heat pumps. Air source heat pumps are not as effective as ground source heat pumps. And moreover, if they are to be used with existing water-based heating systems, you need a huge space to store the water. And there is no known technology to reduce that amount of water sufficiently for most of the flats that we have to accommodate that water which is needed to put water around radiators. So what do? It occurs to me that grey space, defined as roads and car parks, is an excellent place both to put solar panels on top of car parks and to put heat pumps underneath both car parks and roads. Tarmac is a wonderful surface for collecting solar gain. And we also put a lot of hot water underneath it through our sewers and our drains. So why don't we try to introduce some building regulations that are conducive to that and would actually incentivize utility companies, whether they're for gas, water, electric cables or phone cables, whenever they dig up a road, to give the householders nearby the opportunity to pay them to install heat pumps underneath the road. I think that will be a wonderful invention. And insofar as car parks are an important thing in private ownership as well as public ownership, the same sort of incentives could be applied there. So please, can we get our heads around this and enable a large number of flat dwellers in older housing to convert their heating systems to new technology, which is renewable? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on heating at all, so that's really, really useful contribution. And maybe Quentin, you could make a note of, you know, that it would be really helpful for us to talk about electrification in particular, and how we, you know, how we get away from gas in somewhere like London. It's really difficult, even if you're prepared to pay, you know, to do it because you believe it. It's actually very hard to find the technology that works. And so, yeah, maybe, yeah, if we can make sure that we develop something on that. I don't have any hands up, so going to go back to John to see if John, you've seen anything, spotted anything else in the chat.
There was a question much earlier.
You're very quiet, John. I don't know if you could get closer to your mic or turn yourself up or.
Yes, I have tried to turn it up. I don't know why it's so quiet today. There was an earlier question about compulsory purchase orders and how they aren't being used as much as they should be, and what we should potentially do about that through the London plan.
Okay. I might just say quickly that yeah, I mean, I have said in a number of my draft responses that I feel that compulsory purchase, that one of the things that we're facing in London is land banking, and that means that sites are bought, and particularly greenbelt sites are bought, and then nothing happens with them for years. But sometimes these sites are metropolitan open land, and they're within London as well, and they're big, they're bought, they're fenced off, and then nothing happens with them, and that's because they've been land banked. Developers have bought them. So a really good example is Lee Road Sports Ground, bought by Berkeley Homes. It was out of use anyway. They bought it. They are going to develop the bit of it which is not protected, but the rest of it, in the meantime, of course, is just fenced off. Nobody can use it. We met them on site. They said that the land is potentially contaminated, and we were like, well, okay, but you know, this is a really important piece of land for the people who are living there. This is a very deprived area. It's in near to the River Roding. I think it's on the Newham side. So what do we do about it? We've tried for years to work out what to do about this. And this, you know, it's not the only site. There are many of them. And we, you know, I think in conclusion, I thought, well, really, the London plan does need to say something about this, but it's really difficult to know what it can say. So we've said, I'm going to propose that it should say that sites which are protected, metropolitan open land sites, and which should be available to the public, that landowners should be expected to make them available for either sports or for recreation in a reasonable way, publicly accessible, either on a, you know, as a sports ground or otherwise, and that if they don't, that they should face a genuine compulsory, you know, they should face compulsory purchase. It's extremely difficult to compulsory purchase. That's one of the problems. There has to be a very strong case, and it's a really lengthy, complex process, which councils obviously at the moment just do not have the resources to go through. So it's a really tricky one, but worth mentioning, I think. Richard.
Yes, one thing that wasn't covered very thoroughly in this report is brownfield land. Carol Fisk has been on earlier and knows only too well the situation in Enfield, where in 2019, the brownfield register showed there was enough land for 2,970 homes. And yet at the examination in public recently in Enfield, Enfield agreed that that should have been not 2,900, but 29,000 homes in brownfield land. Now, if that is the case in Enfield, I suspect that in other parts of London, there's a great deal more brownfield land than is actually being declared, and probably it could be sort of 5 times or 6 times the figure stated in the brownfield register. Now, there's no mention in the London plan. There's a mention of a review of the Greenbelt, but there's no mention in the London plan of a review of brownfield land. And I think that's something we could really push on, so that the mayor is obligated to do a proper survey of brownfield land. Just to add one point, at the Enfield inquiry, I asked as to whether or not this was a desktop exercise for brownfield land, and was told yes it was, and not one single person had been out with a millboard and pencil to have a look at the sites and see actually what size they were or whether they were even bigger. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think in Enfield, you know, we're not just looking at sites which can accommodate a few homes. We're looking at two sites indeed, which could, you know, what they call a new town, which is 10,000 homes, and of course Meridian Water, which never got built, which can accommodate 10,000, and indeed there's another area which we believe could accommodate at least that level. So I guess the problem with brownfield, the reason why it's not identified, is that often it is sites which are making poor use of space. Now, as far as I know, the NPPF still says that the definition of brownfield really is not just like old industrial space or derelict space. It is anything that has been previously built on. So brownfield is just a word of saying previously built on. And what the NPPF does is directs councils to look at where space is underutilized. So that is where, where things that make really poor use of space. And of course, our big one there is car parks, surface car parks, which make extremely poor use of space and undermine the mayor's transport strategy and so forth. So yeah, that is a really good point, Richard, and we definitely should push towards a realistic identification of brownfields and alternative sites, and that should be absolutely the sequential principle. These should be built on first, as he says. So we're at 1:30. Is anybody any further contributions? Did you spot anything else, John, that looks pressing? If not, we could maybe talk about next steps. John, anything else from you?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, but thank you very much, everybody, for the contributions in the chat. And we will, of course, download the chat and check for anyone's email. If anybody does want to receive bulletins from any of our organisations, then let us know. And we will use the sign up email list from this event to make sure that you know when we've got something published that you can use for your own or look at. Obviously, you don't have to use it to help with your own contributions. And just remember that deadline is the 22nd, that Just Spaces event is the 14th. Is that right? Michael, you might want to put that in the chat again just very quickly, just in case people want it. And yeah, so the next steps, basically, we're going to be working over the next, let's see, week, 8 days, to try to put together something in writing, which we can then put online, and that we can contact you all and say, here's basically our thoughts. We're trying to work collectively as a big group of environmental charities, so that you're not kind of hearing different things from different people as far as possible. But obviously we'll be making our own individual responses too. And of course, it's entirely up to you how you, where you get your information from. So I really hope that that's been useful. But sorry, I just one more thing which I haven't mentioned, which I wanted to mention in relation to transport, which is that where car parking is deemed to be, or where cars are kind of, if we're going to see expansion in the suburbs, that in order to avoid more and more private cars being accommodated and more space being taken up by car parking, that we do need the mayor to retain his strong standards on car development, which is what's called car free. But we need to try to make sure that that where cars are needed, that only car share cars are accommodated. So we very much support the introduction of car share around London in order to reduce the need for privately owned cars, not least because they're extremely expensive to run for anyone in London. But of course, people do need cars. And so we feel really strongly that there's an opportunity to say, look, let's, instead of accommodating car parking in new developments, particularly big new developments, which take up a huge amount of space, let's accommodate car share schemes. Sorry, I've just seen Ed, your hand's up there. Sorry, I just remembered that before finishing. So if we take Ed, and then I'll try to wind up.
Thank you very much, and I'll start with a very brief apology. I've only been able to join quite recently, so if you have discussed any of the things that I mentioned, that is the reason why I'm bringing them up again. So I live, and in fact, someone's literally just mentioned the town where I live. It's Sutton in South London, Southwest London, and the car share schemes in Sutton, they do actually still function because one is close to my home. However, The condition in the southwest of London, yeah, we don't have any tube stations. We don't really have alternatives to cars in many places outside of the urban centres. So Sutton has an overland rail station, which will take you into some of the London hubs. And it's possible to get certain buses to, say, Morden, which is the sort of most southerly extent of the Northern Line. But in reality, if you don't live near those urban centres, you need a car in order to work and function and so on. So we have often asked if we could have some sort of major look, and it's not just the sort of the Sutton borough, it's the surrounding sort of edge of London boroughs have often sort of been lobbied for an increase in provision of options, because we as a group, and indeed the local council is very pro some of the messages you've just said, lowering the dependency on cars and trying to make all the right choices. But the reality dictates that that's not always possible. It's, not everywhere is a bike ride away. So how can we influence the sort of the plans for the future to try and focus on the areas that perhaps are quite poorly served currently, because it's a chicken egg syndrome, because there is no investment, there's no take up, which means it doesn't justify more investment. That's the way I see it. So how do we break that cycle? And very briefly, you came in just as you were mentioning incinerators and everything. We do have an incinerator in Sutton. Here it's actually seen as the least worst option because the alternative was the landfill that was there before. And I heard you say that raising recycling rates, and I think that'd be great if we could do that. But I don't know how you can do that. If you said to me raising rates by 10%, how can we do that? How can this plan, for example, influence people's behaviour? Because as a local authority, I'm quite well aware that we promote recycling. We actually promote reducing in the first place, which I think is actually the more powerful tool, because if you don't generate it, you don't have to then reuse it or recycle it. But we've tried to boost recycling, etc., and we're in the 40-something%, it's low 40s. So how do you enact that behavioural change? Thank you.
Yeah, so okay, well, just really quickly on the recycling stuff, I would say that London needs to, so the London plan can plan for the infrastructure that we need to sort and to reuse, but it needs to be underpinned by a waste strategy which actively promotes what is needed to get people recycling, and that is that there need to be strong communications. We need to invest in those communications, and those communications need to be backed up by enforcement. So for those who don't recycle or recycle incorrectly, they will receive a fine effectively. And I'm unashamed about that. There is far too much of London's waste going to landfill, and it is very easily resolved, landfill or incineration. So that is all of the evidence that I've ever seen shows that is how you get people to recycle. Obviously, they need to be given every opportunity first to do it properly, and for those who just flatly refuse, there needs to be a sanction. So car share, just briefly, the chicken and egg problem. Well, I think part of that is resolved by all of us talking about how incredibly important it is to introduce car share across London. And I would really encourage everybody to say we need car share schemes to enable people to move away from private car ownership. But I don't know if Will, if you could say a couple of words. So Will's from Como UK, who represent the car share companies, but also other shared transport like line bikes and so forth. So Will, hopefully you have some more.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's been a really good discussion, so thank you for having me. So I, for context, only joined Como last month, so still relatively new to the world of shared transport. But for those who aren't aware, Como UK is the UK's charity for shared transport. That includes topics such as e-bikes, e-scooters and car clubs. We do a few things. We do an annual report into the state of car clubs, which I'll put a link in the chat after this, which shows consistently that car clubs do divert people away from private car ownership. In London, the average car club vehicle replaces 30 cars off the streets, and that space in the curbside can be reused for greenery, placemaking, and other more environmentally friendly uses. obviously helps ease congestion and improves air quality. That's the car clubs. So we're responding to the London plan and hoping to see more on that in there. Similar arguments can be made for e-bikes, e-scooters, helping people move around communities, be more connected, and reduce the dependency on private car ownership. The other thing I'll draw attention to and put a link in the chat to is our specific guidance on new developments. We strongly advocate for some of the things discussed around reducing developments that build in private car ownership through parking, having maximum parking standards for dwellings, increasing the provision of car club spaces, and active travel infrastructure is key. So plenty to go on. I'll put a link to our website, and we're happy to have any further conversations on any of those topics after this call, outside of this call.
Great, thank you so much. I don't know if Ed, you wanted to come back, or if your hand's up or not up.
Sorry, very briefly, just because anyone on the call here from one of the outer London boroughs may sympathise that, you know, it's not just about. I think the situation is quite different for a central London dweller than an outer London, because being on the edge of London, you know, we border Surrey. We are going to be making journeys into Surrey as well, which is obviously outside of London. It's a very different place. You know, you cross the border and it's almost like going into another country at times. You know, it's a bit more rural, and they will. How can I put it? You need to be able to interact and do business with, and travel freely between these places. Whereas so Surrey has much underdeveloped public transport than even the edges of London. And so that is why cars retain such an allure, because the freedom that they offer is often worth the cost. You mentioned it's a high cost for having it. I mean, we don't have the congestion charge in the outer London, but the other side is that we are going to places where buses and electric scooters, etc., simply can't take you. So I'm just curious that needs to be included as a sort of a thought pattern, because it's not all about the centre of London, as lovely as it is. I'm sure it's not all about the sort of needs and the assets that they have in terms of the tube network, etc.
I couldn't agree more, but I just feel like if we're looking at densification in the suburbs and we're looking at large scale development, 10,000 homes or more, then the last thing you want is 2 cars per household. What you don't even want 1 car per household. What really you need, if anything, is a car share scheme which can accommodate people's needs for car use, on top of a development which is built in a way which enables people to shop locally and travel by public transport, walking or cycling. So we're at 1:45. So I'm just going to say a huge thank you to Quentin and Michael, who've been beetling away in the background, trying to make sure that we're getting to a point where we have something written down that we can publish in a week or so, and we'll continue to do that. All the contributions today have been incredibly useful, so thank you so much, and thank you for listening, everybody who's come. There's many more people here than we thought would come along for a subject which is, not easy to talk about, planning documents. That's fantastic. So yeah, as I said, next steps will be to message you, to let you know when we've got something in writing online that you can look at, and just to make sure that everybody really does, to really encourage everybody to respond. So yeah, thanks to our speakers, thanks to everybody who's contributed, and thank you all for coming, and have a good rest of the day. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.